lot of ways they're not really that different, but in the ways that matter the most, they're polar opposites. Hello, today we're talking about foil characters. One really common example of foil characters, and there's a reason it's so common, is Harry Potter and Draco Malfoy. Now, they're not the two most different characters in the Harry Potter series. In fact, Harry has much less in common with, for example, Rita Skeeter than he does with Draco Malfoy. So, really, you can't say that they're complete opposites when they're foil characters because they have to have some baseline things in common, some superficial similarities. And Harry and Malfoy do. They're both boys, they're in the same year at Hogwarts, they play the same position on the Quidditch team, they're both recruited onto their respective sides of the conflict, and they both actually are given very similar tasks to kill the leader of the opposing side. So, what makes them different is obviously their Hogwarts house, Gryffindor versus Slytherin, their general personality and attitude toward other people and toward life in general. I would say that one important difference would be the amount of courage that they display. Harry is a very brave, self-sacrificing character. He willingly fights in the war against Voldemort, even though he knows that it could mean that he dies very young. He willingly walks to his death, or what he believes will be his death, in the last book, even though, he has no idea that he will actually end up surviving. Whereas Malfoy, I think, in his most sympathetic moments, is afraid and overwhelmed and in over his head. He's not by any means the worst of the Death Eaters, but at his best, he's freezing up and not making decisions because he's afraid. So, courage versus cowardice is definitely one of the biggest differences between them. I think also the way that they view other people. For instance, Harry befriends Ron, who comes from a poor family and who Malfoy tells him at the very beginning is not the right sort. Hermione, who is Muggle-born, Luna and Neville, who are kind of misfits and don't really fit in at Hogwarts. Malfoy is very snobby and elitist, and because he is that way, Harry's willingness to befriend people based on how well he gets along with them and what common interests or values they have, rather than their status or their money, really stands out a lot more in contrast. Another example, and I usually try really hard not to include examples from classic literature when I make these videos because I feel like these concepts are more easily learned by looking at media that you are already really familiar with. But this one was just too good, I couldn't ignore it. Jean Valjean and Javert from Les Miserables. Now, if you're not familiar with Les Mis, what you should know is Valjean is a criminal who goes to prison for a very long time for the crime of stealing a loaf of bread to feed his starving family, whereas Javert, on the other hand, is the police inspector who spends a long time trying to catch him after he breaks parole. They're very, very different people, but they do have some commonalities. First of all, they're both men around the same age, and they actually both have a similar background. Javert was born inside of a prison. His parents were criminals. He chose a different path in life, but in a different lifetime, he could have been very much like Valjean. But what's really important about them that makes them foil characters is the opposite trajectories of their stories. At the very beginning, Valjean is given a second chance by this bishop who he stole from, who refuses to press charges, gives him more than what he stole, and tells him to use it to become an honest man. And over the course of the story, he becomes a better and better person to the point where at the end, he has the ability to get his revenge on Javert for all the years of tailing him and trying to send him back to prison. And he instead spares Javert's life. And that is too much for Javert, who then commits suicide because he can't make the decision of whether to arrest Valjean or let him go. One thing that the musical did that I think is really clever is they actually gave the two songs where Valjean has just met the bishop and where Javert has just had Valjean spare his life. They used the same tune, they used similar words, but of course the songs reach different conclusions. On the one hand, I am reaching but I fall, and the night is closing in as I stare into the void, to the whirlpool of my sin. I'll escape now from that world, from the world of Jean Valjean. Jean Valjean is nothing now, another story must begin. On the other hand, I am reaching, but I fall, and the stars are black and cold, as I stare into the void of a world that cannot hold. I'll escape now from that world, from the world of Jean Valjean. There is nowhere I can turn, there is no way to go on. You see what I mean? It emphasizes how much of a mirror image of each other the two characters are, and how in a lot of ways they're not really that different, but in the ways that matter the most, they're polar opposites. Now, I don't want to leave you with the idea that foil characters are always enemies, because that's not the case at all. Often they'll be enemies or rivals, or they'll be in conflict with each other in some way, because that's one way to show how different they really are. But I can actually think of examples where they're not enemies and they actually get along very well. One example that comes to mind is Kirk and Spock from Star Trek. Kirk and Spock are the captain and first officer of the Enterprise. They're both Starfleet officers. They are around the same age. They have the same ultimate goals: explore, discover new life and new civilizations, boldly go where no man has gone before. But on a personal level, they're very different. Kirk is kind of a natural leader. He's a human with human emotions. He often wants to do the right thing even when it's against the rules. Whereas Spock, on the other hand, is part Vulcan, and he's very logical and very restrained and very by the book. And he believes that sometimes the greater good has to come before the good of the individual. So in the original show, they actually got along very well. The more recent movie series actually put a lot more conflict between them, which I think is interesting because the difference in their personalities, you would expect some conflict, but in the original show, there really wasn't a whole lot of that. But they definitely have that similar but different quality that makes them really good foil characters, particularly because the older Star Trek shows didn't tend to have recurring enemy characters, or at least not ones that showed up more than once in a blue moon. So I hope that this video was helpful. If you enjoyed it and you'd like to see more like this, feel free to subscribe to my channel. I post new videos twice a week on Mondays and Thursdays, and I talk about reading, writing, classic literature, literary concepts and devices, college tips, study tips, and more.